Okay, welcome. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center in Glen Cove, New York, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our weekly Curators Corner. This is an online program that we started a few months back now when our building was closed because of COVID-19, as a way to show off particular objects in our collection and describe them in a context, so that even though people were not able to access our building, they'd be able to see some of the materials that we have in our holdings. I'd like to, as always, encourage you to pose questions through the Q&A function of Zoom during my talk. If you have questions, please type them in. I will either respond right away or get to them at the end of the program. Before I begin, I'd also like to mention an appeal we're starting, and maybe you heard it if you watched my program last weekend. We are trying to raise $20,000 to support our virtual programming for the fall. We're trying to get 200 people to make $100 donations. So I hope you'll consider going to our website and clicking Give Now. So the website is www.hmtcli.org, and please hit Give Now and make a $100 donation. Okay, I won't push it any further. I'm going to talk today about, just click some buttons here. I'm going to talk today about this picture, a large photograph that stands in our museum that shows an example of public humiliation that was heaped on Jews in the early 1930s in Germany. Here's the caption that we include in our exhibit. It says, "A Jewish businessman and his Aryan girlfriend are publicly humiliated in 1933. Her sign reads, 'I'm the biggest pig here and only sleep with Jews.' His sign says, 'As a Jewish boy, I only sleep with German girls.'" The translation, both in our museum and on the slide here, doesn't capture the rhyme and the catchiness of the on the sayings on these signs. So, but if you look, you can see that on her sign, Schwein rhymes with the final two words, Juden ein, and on his sign, Immer rhymes with the final word Zimmer. So they're kind of catchy phrases. This is one of the most well-known photographs from the early years of Nazi rule. You can see it in a number of Holocaust museums and memorials, including Yad Vashem in Israel or the US Holocaust Museum and Memorial in Washington, D.C. Indeed, it was circulated widely almost as soon as it was taken, both in Nazi Germany and throughout Europe. In 1935, it was included in the September issue of Der Stürmer, the rabidly anti-Semitic newspaper run by Julius Streicher. Mostly it's shown cropped, like we have it on display. But this is the full photograph. And as you can see in the full photograph, you don't see just 4 of the Stormtroopers, the brown shirts, but 7 members of the Stormtroopers and several bystanders who are watching what's going on. And I'm going to mention something about them in a minute. Many early captions for the photograph got both its date and its location wrong, partially because of the 1935 printing in Der Stürmer, which didn't include the actual date of the photograph, and partially because of what you see in the larger image. Often it was cited as having taken place in Hamburg, because in the background you can see a newsstand for the Hamburger Tagblatt, one of the daily papers from Hamburg. And it was also often cited as being taken in September of 1935 because it appeared in Der Stürmer in 1935, and also because the date made sense. The date made sense because it was in September of 1935 that the German Reichstag passed the Nuremberg Laws, which included both the Reichstag citizenship law and the law for the protection of German blood and honor. The citizenship law stripped Jews of their citizenships. The law for the protection of German blood and honor banned marriage between non-Jewish Germans and Jews, and criminalized sexual relations between Jews and non-Jewish Germans, which was labeled as race defilement, and forbade Jews from even employing German maids of a younger age, under 45, because it assumed that Jewish men would force those maids into committing racial defilement. I will add that the Nuremberg Laws were passed by the Reichstag at a special session held at the annual Nazi Party rally grounds in Nuremberg. We don't think much of it now, but the Nazi Party had an annual rally in Nuremberg beginning in 1923. And if you've ever seen Leni Riefenstahl's famous Triumph of the Will, you get a sense of the camaraderie and the spectacle of these annual events. But we're talking about a massive rally and with processions and displays that I think actually these grainy black and white images don't do justice to. In 1935, the German parliament, the Reichstag, an independent political body, and this is a picture of where they normally met, but they met in the final day of the Nazi Party rally to pass those two laws. It would be as if the American House or Senate met in the Democratic National Convention or the Republican National Convention to pass several new laws. In 1935, it was a clear demonstration that the line between the Nazi Party's interests and the broader national interests had been completely erased. The party's interests were the national interests. And as I said, in 1935, in the aftermath of the passage of this new law for the protection of German blood and honor, Der Stürmer published the photograph. It appeared to capture the enforcement of the new law. But as our caption says in the museum, we now know that this picture was taken 2 years earlier, in 1933, before there were any laws about making it illegal for Jewish and non-Jewish Germans to date or marry or have relations. And yet these two people were publicly humiliated, regardless of the fact that they did nothing illegal or wrong. We actually know a lot about this photograph. We know the photograph was taken on July 27th, 1933. Even though it was not printed in Der Stürmer until 1935, it was printed in a local paper the day after it happened on July 28, 1933, in a section headlined, "Jew and His Prostitute Denounced." And we know that it was taken in the city of Cuxhaven by a professional photographer. Cuxhaven is a city and a shipping town in northern Germany located at the mouth of the Elbe River on the North Sea. Here's another map where you see its location outside of Hamburg and right at the place where the Elbe meets the North Sea. Today, it's a city of around 50,000 people, but in the early 1930s, it was a quieter town of 20,000. And although Jews had been living in the area since the mid-1700s, the Jewish community remained small in 1930 in Cuxhaven, with only about 50 Jews in the community. We also know the names of the two victims who were harassed, beaten with a rope, draped with their humiliating signs, and marched through the town by the Stormtroopers, who had been named as a kind of auxiliary police at the time. The man was Oskar Dankner, a married man, 43 years old, a Jewish businessman. He had been born in 1890 in what would later become part of Poland, but moved to Cuxhaven in 1922. And by 1933, he ran a cinema that he owned in the town, as well as a stocking and lingerie store. The harassment and beating that Oskar Dankner received on July 27th was not his first run-in with the Stormtroopers. Hitler was named chancellor on January 30th, 1933. By early March of that year, just 2 months later, Dankner leased his cinema to a non-Jewish resident to operate it, apparently in response to threats from Nazi officials. Regardless, on April 1st, 1933, when the Nazis launched a national boycott against Jewish businesses in Germany, the Nazi Party district leader in Cuxhaven, a guy named Heinz Morris, aggressively supported the boycott and placed two stormtroopers, two SA men, outside of both the cinema owned by Dankner and his lingerie store. At the end of April, Dankner was arrested and placed in jail for 2 months for driving a car without paying the needed taxes or fees. And then shortly after being released from jail, he was attacked by the SA in the humiliation that's captured in our photograph. The woman was Adele Edelman, who was a 23-year-old salesgirl in Dankner's lingerie shop who lived with her widowed mother. The article in the local paper added an additional jab at both Dankner and the larger Jewish community, saying, "This action against Mr. D," they didn't publish his name, "who is married and whose wife is said to be an honorable Jew, must be approved by right-thinking Jews who always emphasize the Jewish family sense." Whether Dankner had the affair with Adele Edelman is not clear. Perhaps he did. Or perhaps the essay just targeted him because he was a successful Jew in the small city. The photograph was taken outside of the Karl Kaufmann House, which was the headquarters of the local Nazi party and one of the first stops on the forced march that the two were taken on through the town. Here you see a map of the route that wound its way through the main commercial streets, through the main public square, and ended at the train station, the most public of venues in the town. At that point, after more than 30 minutes of parading this couple through the town, the police intervened and stopped any further abuse. The fact that the police intervened reinforces the point that Dankner and Edelman had not done anything illegal in 1933. The essay's abuse and harassment was the illegal act, but the police not only didn't arrest them for what they had done, but also allowed it to go on for about a half hour or so. One other element of the harassment was the fact that one of the stormtroopers who paraded Dankner and Edelman through the town was a projectionist at Dankner's theater, suggesting some personal grievance felt by the stormtrooper for having to work for a Jewish boss. I'm not sure which of these men is that person who worked for him. The attack on July 27th had a dramatic effect on both Dankner and Adele Edelman. Adele left Cuxhaven the following day, not even waiting a full 24 hours before moving to the larger city of Hamburg, some 80 miles away. 3 years later, she and her husband are listed as residents of that city, where they owned a shoe shop. Whether she got married before that and was married in Cuxhaven, I don't know. She stayed away from Cuxhaven then for the rest of her life until 1967, when she returned ill and sickly and passed away in that town in 1967. Things were worse for Dankner. Just 5 months after his humiliation, his wife moved to Czechoslovakia and he moved to Warsaw. He continued to own the cinema in Cuxhaven for a few more years, although it was operated by a non-Jewish leaseholder. In 1938, however, he was forced to sell the building and his operation for about 20% of its market value, somewhere around 14,500 Reichsmarks. And if that was not enough, when he brought the money to Poland, he was accused of illegally smuggling money out of Germany. He was fined 9,000 of the 14,500 Reichsmarks that he had received from the sale. And he was imprisoned for a year in a prison in Glatz, which is now in Poland, but right along the Czech border. On December 7th, 1938, Dankner died in that prison of pneumonia or some kind of lung disease. Perhaps not surprisingly, Dankner was not the only Jew to be harassed in Cuxhaven. Even before the Nazis came to power in 1933, despite the small Jewish presence, or perhaps because of it, there was a strong anti-Semitic element in Cuxhaven. And with Hitler's elevation to chancellor, the anti-Semitism became more overt. In February of 1933, leaflets were distributed throughout the town of Cuxhaven asking the Jews to leave for Palestine. And within a few weeks, Christian business owners complied with the Nazi Party demands to fire any Jewish staff members. Within a few months, a number of Jewish residents in the town had moved away, many to the nearby city of Hamburg. By the time of the so-called pogrom of Kristallnacht in 1938, only 13 of the 43 Jewish residents in 1933 still lived in the town. And there was not a single Jewish-owned business yet in 1938. The last Jewish resident left in early 1941, although he was later arrested, sent to Theresienstadt, and murdered. After the war, Heinz Morris, the Nazi district leader in Cuxhaven, was sentenced to a total of 4.5 years in prison, although not specifically for the attack on Dankner and Edelman. In 1992, a memorial stone was erected at the City Museum to commemorate the former Jewish inhabitants of Cuxhaven. The inscription, as you can see, reads, "In memory of the Jewish citizens of the city of Cuxhaven, they had a synagogue built in Ritzbüttel," that's a part that was merged into Cuxhaven, "in 1816. During the National Socialist tyranny, they were terrorized, driven out of the city, and murdered." More recently, in 2012, a new effort to remember the Jewish residents of the town was started with the installation of what would eventually include 30 Stolperstein, the so-called stumbling blocks that are inlaid into the sidewalk outside the buildings where Jews lived. One was placed in front of Oscar Dankner's last address in Cuxhaven that reads, as you can see, "Here lived Oscar Dankner, born 1890, arrested 1937 for foreign exchange offense, place of death, Glatz prison, died December 7th, 1938, lung disease." I've read a few interesting things about why this photograph is so widely used. And the first point here is that it was widely distributed from very early on, even in the 1930s. And it appears to have been shared with other Nazi party members as a sign of how aggressively the team in Cuxhaven were enforcing Nazi ideology, and by the Nazi opposition, who saw the photo as a clear demonstration of Nazi terror. Both sides saw the photograph as a useful tool for their needs, which partially explains its wide usage. So what made this photo so powerful? One answer has to do with the quality of the image. The photograph was taken, as I said, by a professional photographer who helped to compose the group and took a clear, crisp photo that was easy to circulate and copy. But the photo also captures the perpetrators and the victims of the Nazi era as if on a stage, in a way that seems to leave no questions unanswered. The victims look like victims, the perpetrators look like perpetrators. Oscar Dankner appears almost like a caricature, small, not very attractive, large ears. Meanwhile, Adele Edelman fits with the stereotypical image of the Aryan blonde. And the perpetrators look brutal, uneducated, and proud of their uniforms. When the photo is cropped, there are no bystanders to complicate the picture. They're just the Nazis or bullies, depending on which side you were on in 1933, and the victims. Of course, when you see the entire photo, we are left wondering about the bystanders that we see. What was this man thinking as he looked straight at the camera? Or these people as they hurried by in the background? One last point I wanted to re-emphasize was the importance of the date of the photograph. The fact that the action was taken in Cuxhaven 2 years before passage of the law for the protection of German blood and honor suggests the support Hitler had and the Nazi Party had. We think of Hitler and the Nazis as aggressively pushing forward with anti-Semitic laws, but the fact that it took 2 years for Hitler to catch up with where at least some of his supporters were in Cuxhaven in July of 33 gives us a better sense of the political spectrum in Germany in the early 1930s. Hitler, despite what we might like to believe, was not at the far end of the spectrum. We also know that over time, the Stormtroopers became increasingly problematic for Hitler. As violent thugs, they played a key role in squashing the opposition in early Reichstag elections, helping to secure greater representation for the Nazi Party. And the opportunity to serve as a Nazi stormtrooper and to get permission to go and beat in heads with your buddies also spurred Nazi support among the younger demographics in the years before 1933. However, once Hitler came to power, he sought to appeal to a broader population and wanted to develop a more respectable image. And for that change, he needed the stormtroopers to cut back on their violence. He also wanted to gain the support of the military leaders, who saw the stormtroopers as a dangerous force that was outside of military authority. Things came to a head for Hitler and for the stormtroopers on June 30th, 1934, when he launched what became known as the Night of the Long Knives. With his approval, the SS and the Gestapo undertook essentially a series of assassinations of SA leaders, including Ernst Röhm, the SA chief of staff, and other oppositional voices. More than 85 people were killed during that purge, which left no doubt about the ascendancy of the SS and secured the support of military leaders. Our photograph is from that period before the Night of the Long Knives, when the SA, the Stormtroopers, were still a useful tool for Hitler. But their brutality and the belief that they should lead a path for the party to follow, like in Cuxhaven, proved their undoing. Okay, I will stop there. I wanted to, of course, share some information with you about our other upcoming programs, and if you have questions, please type them into our Q&A feature. As far as upcoming programs, tomorrow, I believe this is still going on, although you might want to check our website. We have our chair yoga. It's a fundraiser appropriate for all ages, going to be a virtual chair yoga program. And then next Tuesday at 11 a.m., we're hosting a post-screening discussion about the award-winning film, The Starfish, with the filmmaker Tyler Gilden and a representative from HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Association, Aaron Kate Greenbaum. Let me emphasize that we want you to watch the film on your own. You can get it on various platforms. I think it costs about $2.99, so $3 to watch the film, and then join us at 11 for a post-screening discussion. And then next Wednesday, of course, I'll be back for my next Curator's Corner, which will focus on the liberator High Horowitz, an American GI who was knighted by the French. So thank you very much for coming in and watching our program today, and I hope you'll join us for some of these other programs. And please do go to our website to donate money for our online programs. Okay, let me see if I see any Q&A questions. If you do have questions, please type them in. I hope that this was an interesting program and look forward to seeing you at some of our other upcoming programs ahead. Thanks very much, and I'll stop there. Have a great day.